what, why, and how of mitigation. And the reason why is because, well, here's the question: what is mitigation? And as us mitigators out in the field, sometimes that's a strange word to people. They're not quite sure what it is. So, you know, some people that I've talked to out in the community wanting to talk to them about mitigation, and they think it's litigation. So they say that we don't want to sue anybody. I just, you know, I don't know what mitigation is. Or is it mitigating circumstances, trying to alleviate your legal exposure, which is kind of a legal term. But no, actually a good working definition of mitigation is any action taken to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to people and property from a natural disaster. So here's some examples of mitigation measures. It's not the complete list, of course, but it's on some of the high points. Emergency preparedness, which Mike's going to talk about in a few minutes. Public education, planning, zoning, floodplain management is that's an ongoing process that's protecting communities from flood damages, and also what fits in there is flood insurance. So that's something that you also want to really consider if you don't already have it. And then retrofitting and new design. So retrofitting can be coming back and putting in straps and clips to strengthen an existing building and then incorporate those ideas in new design for new buildings. Also, one of the best mitigation measures if you're in a coastal zone is home elevation, or coastal or flood zone. So that's an excellent mitigation measure, and that's probably a topic that's near and dear of discussion right now in Louisiana in the coastal areas. And here's what I'm talking about for wind mitigation. You can see the clips and straps, and then you can strap it all the way on down to the foundation, and that will really strengthen the complete building. And this is what mitigation looks like after a successful mitigation procedures. And so here you see these houses are elevated. They're above the base flood elevation, has you in a safe zone. You're in safe and it's aesthetically pleasing. The one on the right is well landscaped, and you also have room there. So successful mitigation of elevation, it can really look pretty nice. So come to the why. So why is mitigation important? FEMA is not just about coming out and delivering individual assistance where we're helping people financially with grants. Mitigation is important because, well, it breaks the cycle of repetitive damage and reconstruction after disasters. And communities become more sustainable and disaster resistant, definitely more resilient. And mitigation is also very cost beneficial. In fact, this estimated that mitigation measures, $1 invested in mitigation can save up to $6 in future costs. So that can be very significant. And if you want further confirmation of how important mitigation is, you can ask the Three Little Pigs and about building with strong mitigation techniques. So how is mitigation implemented? Well, first off, you want to create a mitigation plan, both a personal plan for your family and also the governments, the communities, local government, state government, the federal government. It's all about creating a mitigation plan so you can be ready. Flood insurance is very important. If you don't already have it, it's something you can consider. So in the recent 2020 hurricanes that hit the coast of Louisiana, FEMA spent, or NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program, has paid out over $115 million on flood claims. And get this, 35% of those claims were paid out to policies in the moderate to low zones. So it's not just for people in the flood zone. And as a lot of flood insurance specialists like to say, that everybody is in a potential flood zone. So let that sink in. 35% of those policies were paid out, were in the low to moderate zone. And flood insurance can definitely help you get back into your house and get your life together. So you want to incorporate best practice planning. So whatever kind of lessons that you learned from the disaster or rebuilding, or what worked better from that you mitigated on the last time and it came through successfully this time, you want to incorporate that into your planning. And FEMA has some mitigation programs. One of them is 406 mitigation, which mitigation works with the public assistance to help after a disaster, repair and rebuilding and strengthening the infrastructure, roads, bridges, and those kind of things, utilities. And here's a few other examples of hazard mitigation grants that most of them come into play after a disaster. The Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, which helps communities and individuals. And that's something, if if you're in a disaster or been in a disaster, you want to check with your local government and see if they have any activity or programs going on with that. There's also flood mitigation assistance. The newest one is BRIC, Building Resilience Infrastructure and Communities. And also there are some preparedness grants, so to help communities prepare and get ready for future disasters. And we also we'll be sending you some links that have some information. I'm not going to go into great detail on all these grants because they all can kind of get pretty involved in their own rights. But then we'll have some links with some information that you can read up on those. So let's take a look at the cycle of mitigation, or some people call it cycle of resiliency. But so after a disaster, there's the response process where the emergency manager people coming in, the Red Cross, FEMA, the Cajun Navy has a big part in the Louisiana area. And then you move on to, once you kind of get everything under control, you're moving on to the recovery part where everybody's trying to rebuild, and hopefully mitigation plays a part into that. So you can take some tips and advice and use mitigation measures in the recovery part, and then you circle back around and use those things will have you better prepared for the next disaster. And so you want to take what you've learned through this whole cycle and put it into preparedness, and then you're going to be better prepared in the event of another disaster. So that's pretty much the what, why, and how of mitigation. I just wanted to cover it briefly, and because we're going to be doing some other webinars in the future, and I just want everybody to have a good idea of what mitigation is all about. And so, again, FEMA's mission is helping people before, during, and after disasters. And from there, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Mike, and he's going to talk about emergency preparedness. So Mike, you take it away. 。
Good morning, and thank you, Richard. My name is Michael Sampson. Richard introduced me already. I'm a community education and outreach specialist with FEMA. And this program is going to provide you with information to help you identify and mitigate weather-related threats that may impact you and your family. It's important that you recognize that in any emergency, you and your safety, followed by that of your family, are your primary considerations. If you become a victim of the incident, you can't help provide for the safety of your loved ones. You become a burden that may compromise the safety of others as well. What we're going to do is, for the most part, identify methods to prepare for weather-related threats. So I'd like you to take just a moment mentally to yourselves. What weather-related threats could affect you in the area where you live now? We're going to consider some of those. Almost any part of the country has thunderstorms. Basically, thunderstorms present danger from lightning, strong erratic winds, and hail, just to identify a few of the hazards. We really usually don't have too much preparation that we have to do for this one. The next one, tornadoes, is a different story. Tornadoes create high winds, damage and destroy property, and result in injuries and death. More thought and planning is required for preparations to ride out a tornado. Do you live in an area where a tornado could impact you? And then, of course, hurricanes, which for the people in Louisiana, you're our primary audience today. You know the story of hurricanes very well, having gone through 3 of them this last season. Hurricanes bring high winds, heavy rains, which result in damage to a community. Hurricanes bring flooding during a hurricane, either due to torrential rains and tidal surges. Flooding can occur without a hurricane, of course. And I'd like to give you a definition, the legal, real definition of what a flood is. A flood is a temporary condition of partial or complete inundation of 2 or more acres of normally dry land or 2 or more properties. Floods may be from overflow of inland streams and rivers. It can be from tidal water or from an unusual and rapid accumulation of runoff of surface water. And mud flows are included in the definition of flooding. Then there's severe hot and cold temperatures. And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but almost anywhere in the country we can have severe cold and severe, and hot temperatures. It's a good idea to give thought to that and know what steps to take to protect yourself from the impact of these. And lastly, while wildfire is not a feature of weather, wildfire is strongly influenced by weather. And as a result, I wanted to include it in here. In the West, where they have large and damaging fires on a regular basis, more so now it seems than years ago, firefighters will tell you that when they have a large and damaging fire, they won't be able to do much more than try to protect structures until the weather changes. They don't put the fire out while they have what they call severe wildfire weather. So what we're going to talk about in the rest of this session is ways to make a plan for, first of all, shelter at home, evacuation, communications, a communication plan for the family, in other words. And then we're going to talk about constructing the family checklist. So we're going to be looking at checklists, several of them, emergency supplies and water for the home, creating an emergency go kit. And keep in mind with a go kit, some people don't have transportation. Their evacuation plan will be to walk out of if they have to evacuate, or at least walk to a public transportation site and get on. So it may be an emergency go kit that you need to carry by hand. And then we're going to create or look at an evacuation checklist, my personal one that I've worked on and still plan to work on. So first, shelter in place requires some consideration. And you see a list of things here we'll talk briefly about. I'm going to start with the generator because I have a generator in this picture here. This is my personal generator. Right now it's in storage, as you can see. The time to count on a generator is not after you lose power. The generator may not start. You may not have fuel for it. There are any number of things. And as you can see, this one can stand to be cleaned up a little from sitting in storage for a little while. You want to be sure you have, as I mentioned, fuel for the generator. Was it due for service after the last time you ran it? Get that done. I'm going to use hurricane season as the example here. Get it done at the start of hurricane season or a little before. Make sure it's running then, too. Keep extra fuel on hand. And start it, I'd say, at least monthly. I've had to use this one over the last few months a number of times. And because I keep maintenance up on it, even though it looks dirty on the outside, it starts every time. So let's go and talk about a few of the other things that we have, starting with emergency supplies. You want food for 3 to 10 days. Now, in your home, that may not be a problem. Many of us have a freezer with extra food in it. The refrigerator has food, and we may have some non-perishables. You're going to want some other emergency supplies as well. Don't forget this guy here. You may have this sitting on a shelf waiting for a picnic or waiting for sports season. An igloo container or any water container like this will hold a large amount of water. And the nice thing about it, it's water you can take from your tap. In almost any kind of a disaster, your water supply can be compromised, your domestic water supply, whether it's a well or whether it's a public utilities water system. In advance, think about getting at least 3 to 10 days worth of water put away. In a 5-gallon igloo like this is one good way to do it. Saves a little money, too, at the same time. A lot cheaper than buying single-serving cases of water. And some of you may have gone to the store to get water and find that there had been a run on the water ahead of you and there was no water left on the shelves at the store. Consider, too, if you're buying water, go ahead and buy gallon containers of water instead of the single servings of water. Emergency lighting at home is another feature that's going to be important. Now, I keep these lanterns on my shelf and on my windowsills as decor in the house, but they're functional when the power goes out. And again, in almost any kind of a serious weather event, we can lose power. The lanterns on the left and the right are LED lanterns. While they're really great for camping, I find them very useful also when the power fails. Because they're LED, the batteries last a long time, much longer than the old-style lanterns used to do. In the center, I have 2 different styles of kerosene lamps. They sit on my shelf again, on my shelf in my house, and add to the personality, the decor of my living room. But again, they're available, charged with kerosene already, and can be used in the event of an extended power outage. In addition to the lanterns like that, flashlights of different kinds can be very handy to have. And I'm going to start by mentioning, don't forget to have a supply of batteries on hand. It's a little late to be running to the store just as a hurricane may be approaching. You know everyone else is going to be doing that and buying batteries, and you may get there to find the shelves picked over already. Keeping a supply of batteries on hand does not take too much effort, and then you have them when you need them. There are different kinds of lights, as you can see here. The first light you see right behind the battery is what I kind of refer to as a scene light, a work light. It's LED again, so the batteries last a long time. On the top of that light is a flashlight. Second push of the button activates the flashlight, LED again. I use this constantly. It sits on one of my end tables by the front door of my house. Behind it is a standard D cell flashlight. Then to the right, in the middle there, in its original package, even though I have owned this for 3 or 4 years, is a heavy-duty, water-resistant flashlight that takes D-cell batteries. And the reason that one is still unopened, it was given to me as a gift, and I have another one with a specialized battery that I am still using, so I'm saving this for when that one finally fails me. And a very handy light is the one on the right, the headband lamp, which some people will use as a camping lamp. They're great when you have chores to do and you need the extra light and you need both your hands. I find when the power goes out and I want to sit and read at night, I will use that headlamp. And lastly, that black case at the very bottom of the picture is not a case, it's a power pack, which is great for charging cell phones or even charging up your laptop computer if the battery's going dead on it. These are the kind of things to keep on hand for when the power fails. Another thing is to be safe and secure in your home if you're sheltering in place. And it's a good idea to plan now before you have an emergency. Where and how are you going to shelter if the weather gets really bad, especially, say, with the tornado? You want to shelter in an interior secure room away from windows? Plan it now. How many people need to shelter? Sometimes a closet, especially an interior closet, can be worked. The basement, if you have a basement, you want to be sure there's no danger of flooding if there's flooding in the area as well. Safe rooms are a good way to ride out a tornado, a very safe way. Safe rooms can be installed in your home, either in the garage. There are some that are designed to be built into a closet, be part of the closet, but they become a safe room when there's danger of tornado. You might want to look into do a search on your computer for safe rooms and consider the different kinds that are available. And then we have the next consideration. Conditions are going to be such that you cannot stay at home. You're going to evacuate. So where and how do you evacuate? The time to figure that out is not when the evacuation order comes. What is your evacuation route? Now, in many urban areas, there are designated evacuation routes. And if you live in one of those areas, it's recommended, strongly recommended, that you use the designated evacuation routes. Keep in mind that traffic is going to be heavy on those, especially the longer you wait to evacuate, because everyone else is waited also and is evacuating. Do not take off away from those designated evacuation routes. At least it's not recommended. You may find that roads are flooded or other roads are closed, and what you thought was a shortcut puts you in a dead end or puts you at risk. You may have trouble getting back to the designated evacuation route. If you live in an area that does not designate evacuation routes, and I live in one of those, consider now what is your evacuation route and plan at least 2 ways out, preferably in different directions. Drive those routes. Get familiar with them. Understand that if you have to evacuate, one may not be usable. That's why we say 2 directions. And then as you're planning your evacuation, do you have disabled family members or seniors that may take extra effort to get into a vehicle for evacuation? Plan on how you're going to do that and what you're going to have to take to accommodate them, special meds and things like that. If you want to learn more about dealing with seniors and senior preparedness, this coming Thursday, February 4th, at 10:30 in the morning Central Time or 6:30 in the evening Central Time, there will be a webinar on working with seniors in emergency preparedness. And then finally, for evacuation, have a go kit ready. The time to create a go kit is not 15 minutes or 2 hours before you get the evacuation order. The time to prepare that go kit, really, again, let's use hurricane season, is as hurricane season approaches. And then don't leave it sit till next year. Things need to be cycled. Batteries need to come out of flashlights and fresh batteries put in. Some of the foodstuffs, even though they're not perishable, will be better used and get fresh supplies for the following year. And I think I'd like to change my water out too and not have year-old or 2-year-old water when I go to evacuate. Here's a picture of a go kit that can be picked up and walked away with. So someone evacuating on foot could handle it. Personally, I'd like to see shoulder straps on that so I could wear it backpack style. But in a go kit, you want at least 3-day supply of food. And it needs to be non-perishable food. And keep in mind, canned food is heavy. How much stuff are you going to have in that go kit? You know, you're going to have some clothing, probably. So dehydrated food, food ready to eat, you know, beef jerky, sustaining food is what you want. The same goes with water. You want a 3 to 10-day supply. And a go kit like this, probably a 3-day supply. You're evacuating. You'll get somewhere where you'll be able to get more water eventually. So a good 3-day supply. And the 3-day supply basically is defined as 3 gallons per adult per day. Children might take a little less. Then the flashlights. And remember, we talked about you're preparing in advance. You know you have fresh batteries in the flashlights and a spare set to go with it. And a first aid kit is always a good idea. I mentioned clothing already. You're going to want to have a change of clothing. You may not have time in an evacuation to do more than grab this go kit that you prepared. If you do, that'll be a blessing, and we'll talk about that later. And then create a communications plan. Keep in mind, any plan is not really a plan if it is not communicated to every member of the household or everyone who's going to be involved in it. So involve the family in creating the plan, and that includes your small children. It helps to prepare them. It helps them mentally too. And I can speak from personal experience. Children as young as 4 and 5 get excited about helping put things in an emergency kit, either for sheltering in place at home or in the emergency go kit. So things you want with that communication plan. Identification on all family members. Now the adults, we usually have a purse or a wallet, but your children may not have something like that. Consider, as you put an emergency kit together, having your children put together an emergency go pack. And on the younger children especially, create a tag that's sewn into the pack that has identification. Basically their name, their address, your telephone numbers for contact, and the phone numbers of someone out of the area, out of the effects of the event that is causing you to evacuate. And that could be someone from out of state, another family member, a good friend. In any event, have a safe meeting location. This goes for home as well as when you're evacuating, if something happens and you get separated, where are we going to meet? And that safe meeting location should be on that identification tag for the younger children also. Keep in mind that all of us went up, have gone to school, and you'll remember in school we had fire drills. And when that fire alarm sounded, we were supposed to get up and in an orderly manner leave the classroom and proceed out to the safe meeting area on the school grounds. Good idea to have that same kind of a setup, same kind of education provided for children and adults at home. And then lastly, emergency contacts out of area. I mentioned that before. Pick someone and make sure they know that they've been selected, that in the case of separation, everyone will be able to contact. They know that they can leave a message at that location. That may be the area you're evacuating to. Where are you going to evacuate? I moved ahead a little quickly, but I'm going to stay on evacuation just a minute here. Keep in mind that pets are quite often not accepted in public shelters during an evacuation. Only certified service dogs, or service animals, I should say. So you will want to plan a place to evacuate where your pet will be accepted in the event you have to evacuate. And that can be hotels, motels that accept pets. Do you have a friend somewhere you can evacuate to that will put you up for a few days? Those are the things to consider. Let's move on to the evacuation checklist. This is my personal evacuation checklist, taken from other examples, but it's broken up into 4 sections. And don't get eye strain here. I'm going to show you the individual sections. But it's broken up into 15-minute, 30-minute, 1-hour warning, and 2-hour warning. And of course, with each segment then, the longer you have to evacuate, the more you can take with you. So 15-minute warning, what do you want to grab? Here's a list of some suggestions. Things that are important. Our wallets and purses, which usually carry our IDs, have our keys, have our glasses, some of the things. Anymore, we want our cell phones. Grab a charger too. I keep a charger in my truck all the time, in my vehicle, so I don't need to think about pulling a charger out from somewhere else in the house. Emergency cash and credit cards. You're going to probably need to spend some money during the evacuation. And how are you going to handle pets if you have them? It'll go much quicker if you planned ahead a little bit instead of waiting till the last minute and then, okay, now what do I need to grab? And this is the answer, even on very short notice. You can see some of the other things. Always, at least for me, think about at least one change of clothes, some extra socks and whatnot. And don't forget your flashlights again. Let's say you have a little more time, but it's still crowded, 30 minutes. With that, you have your 15-minute list plus the 30-minute list. Think about sleeping bags now. Blankets if you don't have sleeping bags. And we all like a pillow. We've already talked about drinking water before. Think about gallon jugs, not individual servings. Do you have time to grab that 5-gallon igloo and load it? Do you have room? There's a lot of water right there that you can go with. Clothing for several days. Medications can be important. You can see this list here. I'm just highlighting some of them. And of course, high on my list is my laptop computers. Given a little more time, you can add to the first 2 lists and start grabbing other things. Take or safeguard guns and ammo. Do you have an ice chest? It could have been part of your original go kit if you had a little time. But with an ice chest, you could throw ice in it and keep perishable food. You can throw frozen food into it. They'll work to keep your other perishable items from spoiling for a while. And as they thaw, if you get to a place where you can cook some of that food, you have additional food. 3-day food supply, as I mentioned before. In this day of COVID-19, think about face masks. In this day of COVID-19, face masks are usually real close to us, maybe should be on that 15-minute list. And then you see some of the other items. You want to grab some of your important papers, such as insurance, financial, or medical data. And then, do you have 2-hour warning or more? There are other things you could start planning on now. I had a man invite me over to his house once. I'm a retired firefighter now, but I was in the fire department then. And he said, Mike, I want to show you some stuff. And he took me to one special room where he had family records, photo albums and stuff. He said, if we ever get a fire here, he said, these are the things I want saved. If you guys can get in here and do it at all, this is the room. Forget the rest of the house until you take care of this. Think about that for yourself. What items do you want to save? Plan in advance. If you have the time and you have the room to load them up, take them with you. It's easier to plan ahead and know that than to, when you have the notice, be rushing around somewhat like a chicken with your head cut off, trying to figure out what you want to take. The last item, camping equipment. You know, you might get to a point where you want to sleep in a tent because you have no other place to stay for a day or so on the way out. Also, a camp cook stove. If you took some food that needs to be cooked, the camp cook stove may be the only way you have to cook some of it for a while. So carry that with you. And that concludes my presentation. On the screen right now, you have some references for additional information. I'll read a couple of them off, www.ready.gov, and then www.savethechildren.org, www.healthychildren.org, www.getagameplan.org. And finally, I would like to invite you, if you have other questions, or if you, especially in the area of mitigation, to call the number that's up on the screen, 1-833-FEMA-4US, also known as 1-833-336-2487, or you can send an email to FEMA-LAMIT@fema.dhs.gov. If you're affected by a federally declared disaster and need to register for federal assistance with FEMA, the number to call is 1-800-621-FEMA. That's 1-800-621-3362. Or you can log on to www.disasterassistance.gov. I want to thank you for tuning in. And I'd like to see now if we have any questions that need to be answered.
Michael, I don't see any questions, but I would we'll give it just a moment to see if anything pops up in there. But also if you would go ahead and leave your email address, and we will send you all this information, the PowerPoint, the contact information, and also remind you that there are some future webinars with some really good information, and we also would send you contact information on how to listen to some of the webinars that we have done in the past that might cover some of the areas of concern that you have. So we're gonna give it just a moment to let people put their email address in there and see if any questions come up in the question and answer box.
Richard, while we're waiting for questions to come up, I would like to add one more comment, and that would be on generator safety. Don't run an internal combustion engine inside your house. It seems to be common sense, but we've had a couple of cases where people did just that, or ran it too close, had the generator positioned too close to the house, too close to an opening, and exhaust fumes got inside. Carbon monoxide is a serious health risk, and you don't need that. Recommended keeping your generator 10 to 15 feet away from the house, definitely that far away from any openings, and direct the exhaust on the generator away from the house. Also, be sure you're using good wiring. If you're using extension cords, don't try to overload them. The ideal would be to have your generator set up so you can plug the generator into a whole house connection with just a few circuits hooked into the whole house part of the connection that will run just the things you need. Most generators, unless you have a very large one, are not going to run the entire house. That's it.
Yeah, thank you for those safety tips, Mike. That's very important information, and also some really valuable information on the checklist. I'm gonna strengthen my go kit and my checklist with using some of those pointers. So so thanks a lot for all that. And we're gonna hang.
Copy of that checklist will be emailed to those who send an email address, as well as one that's put out by FEMA.
Okay, good.
If no questions are coming up, Richard, I'm going to suggest that we are done here. What do you think?
I think so. Cindy, could you give us a signal? What do you think?
I think it's a go.